Would you mind if I named some characters and you tell me who they were based off of?
Go for it.
Phoebe.
Me.
Marigold.
Also me, but a different side of me. Phoebe and Marigold are me having a conversation with myself a lot of the time.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Comics Cube. I am with Dana Simpson, creator of Phoebe and Her Unicorn.
Hi.
So, Dana, for those who may not be reading the daily strips or subscribing to Go Comics or buying your books, what would your pitch be, your elevator pitch be for Phoebe and Her Unicorn?
Phoebe and Her Unicorn is the story of a little girl named Phoebe who manipulates a unicorn into becoming her best friend.
By hitting her with a rock.
I think in my elevator pitch, I would also have to mention that the unicorn is named Marigold Heavenly Nostrils because I think that's a good name for a unicorn.
It's actually a great name. And I hear you got that name off of a name generator.
I did. I typed my name into I typed my name into a unicorn name generator online, which is something anyone could do. I encourage, when I speak at schools, I encourage kids to find their own online unicorn names. And I got back Marigold Heavenly Nostrils, and it was too good not to use.
It was perfect because in the strip, it's actually so emblematic of how Marigold is. Like, she's just so arrogant, but also
arrogant and a bit more ridiculous than she realizes.
And absolutely more ridiculous, to the point where she would praise her own nostrils. Talking about your influences, to start, there's one particular comic strip that is a very obvious influence on your work. Can you talk about how Calvin and Hobbes informed how you approach these things?
I grew up loving Calvin and Hobbes. I think I was 7 or 8 years old when that strip came out. And before that, I was into Peanuts and stuff. Comic strips were already something I was into, but Calvin and Hobbes came out, and it was, I mean, I think everyone fell in love with that strip when it came out, and it's still like one of my favorite things ever. And it was hard not to be influenced by it. It was this combination of sweet and caustic and fanciful and grounded that I think a lot of us aspire to. And when I was creating Phoebe and Her Unicorn, I kind of envisioned it as almost a feminist answer to Calvin and Hobbes. Not that I think Calvin and Hobbes is unfeminist necessarily, but like Calvin's friend Susie is a really interesting friend. Calvin's nemesis, frenemy,
future wife,
Susie from Calvin and Hobbes is a great character, and I always felt like we never got to see things from her point of view in the way I would have liked. I always thought that would have been nice. Like, Susie's this smart, interesting kid, and she's only ever a foil for Calvin in the strip. And so I've described my strip before as Susie's Revenge. Basically, you know, when I was designing the strip, it was like, what's the girl equivalent of a boy and a tiger? It's a girl and a unicorn. And that seemed obvious as soon as I thought of it. And I think I wouldn't describe my strip as necessarily just like girl Calvin and Hobbes, although I don't really object to people describing it that way because there are obvious similarities. It's a kid and an animal. Yeah, it was a big influence, and I am not hiding that fact. I think everybody figures that out pretty quickly.
I think I subscribe to a lot of Go Comics, and I gotta say, I think a lot of you are fairly obviously influenced by that particular strip. But you're right. Yeah, you're not. It's not all just Calvin and Hobbes stuff. There's a lot of other influences to it. Can you talk about the other influences that have gone into?
Like I said, the first comic strip I really discovered was Peanuts. Charlie Brown, Snoopy, Lucy, the whole gang. My mother had this treasury of Peanuts comics. I think she'd had since she was a kid, that was around the house when I was really little, and I started reading it, and I was sort of mesmerized by it. And I just loved how, you know, it was silly, but it was thoughtful and it was dealing with serious issues, and it kind of blew my little mind a little bit. And a few years later, I was heavily into a strip called Bloom County by, I'm going to say his name wrong, Berkeley Breathed? Breathed?
If you
I've met him.
guys if you
I've
guys
met
don't
him
know
and
how
I
to
don't remember how
pronounce
to
it,
pronounce
we
his
can't help.
name. Yeah, I've met the man once and I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'm sorry,
I always
Mr.
pronounced it as breathed,
B.
like just you
Yeah,
breathe.
I never knew how to pronounce it, and I guess I apparently still don't. But I met him one year when he was at San Diego Comic-Con, and that was wonderful. I've never met Mr. Watterson, and I never got to meet Mr. Schultz, but I loved Bloom County when I was a kid, even though it kind of went over my head. Like it was very political, and there were lots of topical references in it and stuff. But it was also just silly, and that appealed to me. And then there'd be a topical political reference to something that I, being 8 or 9 years old, wouldn't get. And then I would ask my mom, and I would learn. I'd be like, "Mom, tell me who Jesse Jackson is," and then I would know. I learned some of the first things I ever knew about American politics from asking my mom to explain Bloom County to me. But it was really appealing to me as a kid. It was silly. It starred a bunch of talking animals. I still have a plushie of Opus the Penguin that I've had since I was a kid.
Do you anything other influences outside of comic strips?
I would cite The Simpsons as a really big influence. That show came on when I was 12. I've just revealed my age if you want to do the math. But
I'm not that far off, so
I was really like, my family wasn't even that much of a TV family, but our last name being Simpson, how could we not become fans of that show? So it became like a weekly thing in my family. We'd watch The Simpsons, and I think both my sense of humor and my drawing style were heavily influenced by it. I think there's more than a little bit of Lisa Simpson and Phoebe, and
oh, I see that.
yeah, still one of my favorite TV characters ever. Kind of the first TV character I ever saw who reminded me of myself. TV in the 80s was kind of a barren wasteland of stupidity, at least sitcoms were, and there wasn't that much on that I found anything to connect with. But The Simpsons was smart, and it was a big influence. And also, I think you can see some of it in my drawing style, in particular how I draw hands. I kind of draw Simpson hands, worse than they do on The Simpsons, but I think you can kind of, if you look closely at how I draw hands, I think that there's a similarity there.
I'll take a look at that next time.
Much later, like much later, like decades, I was a big fan of the show My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic, and I think it's sort of what steered me into drawing unicorns, because I thought that show was really fun and sweet, and also really feminist. Like, all 6 of the main characters are female, and it's a heavily girl-centric show, that because a lot of shows and a lot of comics, or just a lot of media, would always have like the one girl character, like the Smurfette principle, I think Lindsay Ellis called it, where there's the one character who's female and her personality is that she's female. Like, she's the girl, and that's kind of just all there is to her. And Friendship is Magic, having a mostly female main cast, and sort of the message sort of being girls can be just anything. We have as big a range of personalities as guys do. And that was kind of what made me realize what I really wanted to do was a strip where both of the leads were female. And it kind of led me to creating Phoebe a couple years later.
And I keep asking you about your influences, but it seems to me, reading a lot of your older interviews, that the most important influence on the strip is actually your real life. And I've heard you say,
yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think it's true of a lot of artists. Like, you're always sort of drawing from your own life. I think anytime, that was one of the things that I liked about cartooning as a medium in the first place. It's like, if you read Charles Schultz, if you read Peanuts, you are reading the inside of Charles Schultz's mind. If you read Calvin and Hobbes, you're reading the inside of Watterson's mind. It's kind of one person's unfiltered vision, and of course people are drawing on their own lives and their own thoughts and experiences, and I liked that. Like, I love TV animation. I love all sorts of comics and stuff, but like a lot of media is a collaborative effort, and that's great too. You know, I mean, you have a bunch of people coming together to make something that's maybe greater than the sum of its parts, and I love that too. But I'm enough of a loner that I liked the idea of getting to make something myself and getting to just take my own thoughts and my own life and process that into fiction. And I wound up making comics as my art form because I like drawing and I like writing, and comics you get to do both. And I like talking. So it combines all the things I like. I like talking about myself. My favorite example to mention, like when I'm speaking to kids or whatever, is there was a storyline in the comic where Phoebe and Marigold went to their friend Max's birthday party at a video game arcade. And the reason that I wrote that was that I had just gone to my friend John's birthday party at a video game arcade. And so that was what was in my mind. And I just kind of walk around all day being like, "Oh, what's happening right now? Would it be funny if a unicorn were doing this? Is there something funny here? Is there something relatable here? Can I mine this for material for my comic?" And there's kind of a part of my brain that's just always thinking that. I've trained it to do that.
Is the question, would it be funny if a unicorn was doing this? Is the answer yes, like 90% of the time?
Oh yeah, something like that. Like, unless I'm doing something that's really not fun at all, like, I don't know, having a mammogram or something. I can't really slot a unicorn into a small number of activities, but most things, doing my taxes. It'd be funny if a unicorn was doing taxes, wouldn't it? Just anything is more fun with a unicorn in
Especially if it's marigold.
it.
Would you, would you mind if I named some characters and you tell me who they were based off of?
Go for it.
Phoebe.
Me.
Marigold.
Also me, but a different side of me. Phoebe and Marigold are me having a conversation with myself a lot of the time. Like Phoebe is child me. Phoebe is me if you made me 9 years old again and then let me hang out with a unicorn all day. And Marigold is sort of a specific part of my personality. She's sort of my ego, maybe, like the voice inside my head that's saying, "Hey, you're great," without all of the other voices saying, "Yes, but here's all of your flaws, and you did this wrong yesterday," and that sort of drags me back down to earth. Marigold is me if I didn't have any of that, and it was just the one voice telling me all the time that I was wonderful.
Speaking of voices that bring Phoebe down, Phoebe's frenemy Dakota.
My sister Nicole. But that was not the original intention for that character. Like Nikki, who, by the way, is one of my best friends. But originally Dakota was just sort of a foil for Phoebe. She was just like the mean girl at school who I needed to have in the story for certain things to happen. But as soon as Nikki started reading the comic, she kind of gravitated to Dakota. She was like, "Oh, I like this kid." And then she kind of became almost the Dakota whisperer. Like I sometimes run stuff Dakota is going to say by Nikki. And the fact that Dakota and Phoebe have the relationship they do, I think, is because Nikki kind of attached herself to that character. And so, yeah, she sort of after the fact became the Nikki character in the strip.
That's interesting. That's a case of the strip writing itself in a way, right?
Yeah, and then that led Dakota in directions I never thought she'd go in. Like, she was originally just a mean character from Phoebe's school, but like she went on this whole journey over the course of the first few years of the strip where she accidentally acquired magic hair, and then goblins abducted her to try and use her magic in her hair, and then after she was rescued, the goblins were kind of she hung out with them after that. And so in a lot of stories, Dakota is like surrounded by goblins that are carrying her around on like a throne. And that I didn't expect any of that to happen. That was never the plan for her. It's just where she ended up going as a character. And it's fun when that happens.
It's great. What about Phoebe's human best friend, Max.
My spouse Orv, who is sitting over there in the next room. Hi, Orv. Orv is um, we've been married for 10 years. We've known each other for most of our lives. We were like 18 when we met. And Orv is uh, a non-binary person and a tech worker. They work for the University of California at Santa Barbara doing computers for the math department. And yeah, Max is, there's even a physical resemblance. Orv is blonde and wears glasses, and so is Max. And yeah, that's where Max came from. And that was, Max was almost like the other main character in the strip. If Marigold hadn't sort of come along, when I was trying to come up with an idea for a strip to do, I thought of having it be just about Phoebe and Max, and then Marigold sort of came in and Max sort of became a secondary character. I'm sorry, or I love you, but you became a secondary character.
Your secondary character to yourself and yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there were two of me, so there wasn't as much room for you. I'm sorry.
Are Phoebe's parents based on anyone? Because we're about the same age, and I don't imagine my dad playing video games.
Yeah, I always kind of thought that parents in comic strips, they always seemed a little stuck in the 50s. Like they always seemed like 50s sitcom parents, and they kind of, that felt generationally wrong. Like if Phoebe's a kid now, then her parents are millennials. And so I sort of based her parents on millennial friends of mine who have kids. It's sort of like they're composite characters of various people. Phoebe's dad is drawn to look like my friend Ben, but personality-wise, Phoebe's mom is drawn to look a little like me if I were younger and skinnier. But personality-wise, they're just sort of composites of every millennial parent I know.
That makes sense.
They play video games together, and also their occupations are sort of me and Orv. Like Phoebe's dad is a systems administrator. Phoebe's mom is an artist who works out of her house, and those are the jobs that Orv and I have. So there's that. See, when you're writing all the characters yourself, when you're doing the whole project yourself, all the characters end up being half you, kind of.
That's okay though. Speaking of being you, on July 25th, 2017, you introduced Max's parents to the strip.
Mm-hmm.
And they're lesbians. On that same day on your blog, you explained why. So I've got two questions about that. Can you talk about your approach to representation? How important is it to art? And I want to know if you received any backlash from the syndicate or the fans or any particular newspapers.
I'll answer the second question first. I got no backlash from the syndicate. In fact, they were enthusiastic about it. And the fans, I guess a little bit. Like nobody wrote me angry letters being like, how dare you? But if you go on Amazon and read what 1-star reviews there are for the first book where they show up, which was book 6, The Magic Storm, that was the first place they appeared. And there are some 1-star reviews of that book where it's like, well, this book is gay propaganda and I will never let my children read it again. And I feel sorry for people whose parents feel that way about it. There was one newspaper, I think, that didn't run the first strips that they were in, but I'm not even sure I'm remembering that correctly. There wasn't much in terms of backlash. I feel like people are pretty used to gay people being a thing that exists now, and that's obviously a very good development as far as I'm concerned. I remember in the 90s when the strip For Better or For Worse introduced a gay character, and a substantial portion of its readership was deeply offended by it. And some newspapers, particularly in the American South, wouldn't run those strips, and it was a big controversy. I remember even discussing it in a class at school. And then I introduced, the fact that Max had lesbian parents 20 years later, and pretty much nothing happened. it didn't really affect me or the strip in any really noticeable way. I feel like representation is important. Like, there are kids with gay parents and it's no big deal. And I like to, when I do representation like that, I like to just sort of put it in the strip and have it just be there and be normal because it is normal and not a big deal. And I hope some, kid out there with lesbian parents feels seen by that. And I've done some other stuff like that. Like early 2019, I think I introduced a non-binary character into the strip. He was a young unicorn named
Named
Infernus the
Infernus.
Unicorn. Yeah, Infernus the Unicorn of Death, Frenemy for short. And Frenemy explains that their pronoun is nay and that they're non-binary. And one newspaper wouldn't run that. One newspaper in Utah refused to run that, but pretty much no one else said anything about it. I was almost disappointed by the lack of reaction, but I was also pleased by it because it means that for a lot of people, the existence of a non-binary character is no big deal. And I thought, am I the first person to include a non-binary character in a newspaper strip? And I looked into it, and no, Doonesbury did it before me.
It did?
But
Okay. I was actually
yeah,
gonna ask that.
I didn't. Yeah, I was almost disappointed. Like, good for Doonesbury, but yeah, apparently I wasn't first.
Way to go, Gary Trudeau.
He's always
Um,
been pretty progressive.
yeah, I was actually gonna ask because I was actually gonna ask you if you were the first one to show an LGBT couple, because and then I was reminded of For Better or For Worse.
Yeah,
If
I
I
don't.
remember right, they introduced a gay character and there wasn't even anything. It was just a gay character and people
Yeah,
went
he was like a
nuts.
friend of Michael's, I think, who came out of the closet in the strip, and like his parents kicked him out of the house and stuff, and it was a dramatic story arc that was taking on issue. And this was like early 90s. Like, gay representation was this huge controversial issue for people at the time in a way that it's not now, thank goodness. That was brave of her, I thought, to take that on. And I think I now can do it and nobody cares that much because she went, people like her went first and broke that ground for people like me.
My next question is, well, it's not really a question. I want to say congratulations on the Nickelodeon deal.
Oh, thanks. I'm trying not to count my chickens before they hatch. For those who don't know, it was recently announced that Nickelodeon is interested in adapting Phoebe as a possible multi-platform property, meaning that they're talking both TV and movies. And I don't want to say too much about it now because we're still sort of hammering out the details of how this is going to work, but it does seem like Nickelodeon is enthusiastic about the project. So fingers crossed. I really, really would like for this to work out. I've always wanted to see my work animated.
Works out too because you've got some original graphic novels that can
Yeah,
prove it can run a long running story.
I feel like Magic Storm in particular would be a great basis for a film. I've kind of pushed that in meetings. We'll see. I'm really hopeful about this. It really seems like they're legitimately interested. I'm trying not to count my chickens because I was working on an animated project of an animated Phoebe show for a couple years elsewhere. Um, I'm never sure how much I'm supposed to talk about it. I'm not under an NDA from anyone, non-disclosure agreement.
Yeah.
So technically I can say anything I want about it, but yeah, for a couple years, we were developing a show for Amazon and with Amazon Studios. And we got as far as having a pilot script and starting to hire writers and artists, but there was a big executive shakeup there. Basically, the person who greenlit the project went somewhere else. The new people weren't as interested in new animated kids program generally, and in my project in particular, I guess. And we ended up, after 2 years of work, kind of being cut loose and having to go back and have some more meetings, and that's how we ended up with Nickelodeon. So I don't want to assume anything's going to happen till it does, but I am really excited about this.
But Nickelodeon, we've gotten far enough that Nickelodeon actually put out a press release saying they were.
Yeah, Amazon never did that. That was never public. And then Nickelodeon like actually put it out there for people to see, which I'm new to this. I'm still learning how all of this works, but that sure seems to me like it means they're taking it seriously. I guess we'll see.
I love how you announced it on your Facebook because you were basically just like, oh yeah, I guess I can talk about this now.
Because I can talk about this now. I was trying to be all nonchalant. There's this thing that's happening. It's no big deal, but Nickelodeon's making an animated show. Ah!
Like what a Generation X way to say a big announcement.
I'm not only Generation X. I'm from Seattle, so
Also from Seattle, so you're full on grunge.
yeah. There's a lot of pictures of teenage me wearing flannel.
And I wanted to talk about other things that you've done. So you used to do a comic called Ozzie and Millie.
I did, in fact,
This is
for 10 years.
this is interesting because I don't really see a lot of comic strip artists move from one strip to another, but you stopped that and you created Phoebe and Her Unicorn a few years later.
I did.
Yeah.
Ozzie and Millie was my first strip, and I always wanted that to be syndicated. I always wanted to, and I was sending Ozzie and Millie to the newspaper syndicates. I think there were 5 of them at the time, 7. I don't know. I was sending the strips to all of them, trying to get it picked up, and obviously I never actually did. That strip was just, so it was a web comic for 10 years that I did, and I'm pleased that Ozzie and Millie still has fans. Like, Ozzie and Millie was the story of these 2 foxes who are children and go to school, and the elevator pitch for Ozzie and Millie is a little more complicated. Phoebe's a really easy elevator pitch. Ozzie and Millie is sort of this weird furry kids in elementary school comic, and Ozzie is very zen and serene and unflappable, and Millie is this destructive force who wants to light the world on fire. It was a thing I wrote in my teens and 20s when my heart was in turmoil, and so I think Ozzie and Millie it had its audience, and it had its devoted fans. It still does. But after 10 years of doing a webcomic and having resigned myself to the fact that it was never gonna get syndicated like I wanted it to, I sort of did plan to get out of doing comic strips at that point. I didn't intend to go on and do another one after it. But a few months after Ozzie and Millie ended, I found out about the comic strip Superstar contest, which was like a talent search that Anders McNeil Syndication Publishing, which is now my publisher, which is a total spoiler for how this story ends. But they had a talent search for comics, and the prize was you got a development deal to do a newspaper comic, and also a book deal to publish a book through them. And I was like, wow, that's everything I want. That's everything I've been trying to do for 10 years. I'm definitely going to enter this. And I thought about, should I just enter Ozzie and Millie? But I was kind of done doing it after 10 years. And so I created this strip that was sort of, that would become Phoebe and Her Unicorn, but wasn't Phoebe and Her Unicorn yet. I had like 2 weeks before the deadline to hand stuff in. Sorry. And so I had this idea to do a strip. It was called Girl originally, and it starred this kid who would become Phoebe, but she didn't have that name yet. She didn't have a name at all. She was just Girl. And the idea for the comic was that she hangs out in the woods behind her house with her talking animal friends. And I wrote up like a 12 strip sample of this and sent it in. And I kind of forgot I entered. And then my spouse was like, did you know that you're in the top 250? And I was like, of what? And then they showed me. I was like, the contest that I entered like 2 months ago, and then kind of forgot. And after that, I was like obsessively watching, and then I was in the top 100 and the top 50. And then I was in the top 10. And when it got to the top 10, the public got to vote. Up till that it was the judges selecting, and the judges were awesome comics people like Gary Trudeau and Lynn Johnston and Mark Tatuli, and they picked me for the top 10. So at that point,
Wow.
when the people started voting, I said to all of the Ozzie and Millie fans, please vote for me. And then I won. And I will never know this for sure, but I've always suspected that the loyal Ozzie and Millie fans put me over the top, and so they're responsible for my having then gone on to put a unicorn in the strip, name the protagonist Phoebe, and make Phoebe and Her Unicorn as we know it now. So thanks, Ozzie and Millie fans. You kind of made all of this work. I think it's my theory.
So would you say that the two strips kind of show a difference in the state of mind that your life is in?
I think so. Because when I created Ozzie and Millie, I was like 19, and when I created Phoebe and Her Unicorn, I was in my early 30s, and I was in a really different place in my life. A lot had happened. I was in a much more settled place in my life. Ozzie and Millie, I think you can read it and recognize that it was written by somebody who's really kind of trying to figure the world out. Millie wrestles with some pretty big philosophical questions. She's kind of a troubled kid, because so was I in my 20s. And then by the time Phoebe comes along, Phoebe is a little more well-adjusted, because that's where I am now.
That's a cute cat.
My cat Sophia has made an appearance. She missed me while I was camping. She wants attention now.
Yeah. So now you're making Phoebe and Her Unicorn, which is a big hit among the young audience as well.
Surprisingly popular. That fact has surprised me. It has surpassed my expectations.
That it's a big hit, or it's popular among the young audience?
Mostly that it's a big hit. I mean, I did not set out necessarily to write for kids, though. Like, I just wrote the strip I wanted to write, and then they said, oh, great, we're going to publish this as part of our line of comics for kids. And I was like, that makes sense. It's a story about a kid and a unicorn. But Maurice Sendak, one of the great children's writer, used to say, I write for me and they tell me it's for children. And that's kind of how it was for me, too. So, like, when we did the first book, I had started out just writing the stuff I wanted to write. And so we had to make some edits to that first book so that it would be more friendly for kids, mostly just taking out stuff my editor thought kids wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like my go-to example for this is in the very beginning, when Phoebe's trying to figure out what she wants to wish for. Marigold has given her one wish, and Phoebe's trying to pick a wish, and she's it's like, I wish for infinity, more wishes. And Marigold says, you can't wish for that. Infinity dollars? And Marigold says, world peace was not even in your top 2. And Phoebe says, I'm a 4th grader. And that line, as originally written, and I think this is still on the Go Comics site, if you go back and find that strip, the original line was, I'm a 4th grader, not Bono. And yeah, and my editor was like, kids are not going to know who Bono is. And I was like, really? For those who don't know, Bono, the lead singer of the band U2, who were popular in the 80s and 90s, and he's also known as a philanthropist who goes around advocating for causes like eliminating hunger. And I was like, really? Kids don't know who Bono is? Like, when I was 10, I knew who Bob Dylan was. But I've asked kids, and it's true. Kids do not know who Bono is. So
I know. Yeah.
Good, we took that line out. And there were some other things like that. There was a reference to The Godfather. She was like, you can't have that.
I've got younger people in my workplace who don't know who Robert Downey Jr. is. They know him as Tony Stark.
But they don't know the actor's name?
Yeah. I'm like what?
Weird.
That's weird.
His name's not really Tony Stark? Oh my gosh.
And another thing about Phoebe and Her Unicorn, if you go on the Go Comics site, is that if you read it from the very beginning, it kind of repeats the first story at some point, kind of retold a bit.
It does, yeah. The reason for that is that the strip originally ran online. It's launched in 2012 as an online strip on Go Comics, and it didn't get its newspaper launch until 3 years later, almost 3 years later. And so when it launched in newspapers, uh, we rewrote that first storyline in a compressed way. So it took up like a week or two instead of the like, couple of months that it played out in its original form. If you read the book, it's the original version from 2012. But we wanted to rewrite it for newspaper readers so that they would, to ease them into the story. And then we just continued as normal. That was a little bit awkward, I guess, because I'd been telling this story already for 3 years, and then I had to sort of introduce a new audience to it without boring the original audience. And I don't know, I think we threaded that needle just fine.
You couldn't
Oh,
just
also,
use the old ones and put them and print
um,
those.
there was kind of a rule in the beginning with the newspaper strip that storylines shouldn't drag out for more than a week. I'm not
Oh,
really
okay.
I'm not really under that rule anymore because the strip is pretty established. But in the beginning, there was kind of a sense that we're introducing people to this. We want people who are just joining you on any given day to know what's going on. So the stories are short. And you can sort of see that if you read the books, the stories get a lot shorter around book 5, because book 5 is where the newspaper strips start. Books 1 through 4 are all stuff that was online from 2012 to 2015. This is also probably where I should mention that the original title of the strip was Heavenly Nostrils, and it ran online under the title Heavenly Nostrils for almost 3 years. And they told me from the beginning, like, it was originally called Girl. It went through a few different titles. They told me you can't call a strip Girl because it's too common of a word. You'll never be the #1 Google hit for that term, or probably even on the first page. And I was like, okay, fine. And after Marigold came along and we decided that the strip was going to be about Phoebe and Marigold, I started calling it Heavenly Nostrils. And we launched it online under that title. But they told me even at the time, you can call it that on Go Comics, but if we do a newspaper launch, you're going to have to rename it, because Heavenly Nostrils is a weird title, and newspaper editors are sort of small c conservative, mostly older white guys, and will sell to more papers if you call it something more neutral and sort of more descriptive of the strip than Heavenly Nostrils. And I kind of thought that after 3 years, maybe everybody would forget they said that, that everyone would just be used to the name and we could keep it. But now, when we did the newspaper launch, they were like, okay, we're going to call it Phoebe and Her Unicorn. And I was like, fine, because I just wanted a newspaper launch.
That's a really weird rule for an industry that has a comic called Pearls Before Swine.
I know, but there is a long tradition of creators having their strips renamed by their syndicates. Like The Far Side was originally called Nature's Way. Bloom County was originally, what was it? It was originally the Academia Waltz. Doonesbury was Bull Tales originally. And Peanuts was Lil Folks, famously, originally. And Charles Schultz never liked the title Peanuts.
You had to live with
So
it for 50 years.
yeah. And so I'm part of a tradition of people whose syndicates rename their work. I know, I'm fine with Phoebe and Her Unicorn. Heavenly Nostrils was polarizing. Like, you either loved that as a title or you hated it. People still tell me that they miss it, but other people have told me, like, my mother hates it. People who tell me like that's just such a weird name. Oh yeah, that was what was fun about it.
It kind of weeds out the people who, like, the ones who don't like it can probably get you can tell the ones who like it will probably really like your sense of humor, I think.
Yeah,
is what
I mean that's your target audience, right? People who like your sense of humor. But it's done fine as Phoebe and Her Unicorn, so I guess they knew what they were doing. Oh, and also the first book came out before the strip was in newspapers, like 6 months before.
Oh, okay.
And so the book was originally going to be called Heavenly Nostrils. Like, there are early proof copies of it. I've got a couple of them here, and every once in a while somebody hands me one to sign. There are these early proof copies that we handed out that were called Heavenly Nostrils. And what I was told at the time was Barnes and Noble told us we will buy more copies of this if the title is more descriptive of the contents. So the first book was originally called Phoebe and Her Unicorn, A Heavenly Nostrils Chronicle. And then once the strip got renamed a few months later, they took that A Heavenly Nostrils Chronicle tag off of it. And now if you buy book one, it's just called Phoebe and Her Unicorn. So I lost that argument pretty thoroughly.
At least you admit to losing it
Oh
instead of
yeah,
standing your ground.
I caved immediately.
My last question is: you're working on a comic book called "Only You're Different." Would you
Yes,
you'd like to
Only You're
say something
Different,
about that?
which is oh sorry. That is a Only You're Different is a graphic novel memoir, mostly about my childhood. It's kind of about me and my mother, actually, as it ends up. And I had always wanted to write a book like this. This is the part where I discuss the fact that I am a transgender woman, and Only You're Different is a book that I conceived years ago. I always wanted to write a book about what it was like being a trans kid, like a closeted trans kid back before we had the cultural vocabulary to talk about being trans. Like, we talked about how in the early 90s, for better or for worse, having a gay character was this huge deal. Like, and being LGBT in any fashion was like, it was a lot harder back then. And I was aware that I felt like a girl from pretty much always, pretty much my whole life, but I wasn't able to come out with it until my 20s because you just kind of didn't back then. I mean, I guess some people did, but nobody I knew. And it was this like big thing that I thought I was just never going to be able to tell anybody, and I just have to live with it forever. And I was very unhappy. And my mom knew I was a really unhappy kid, and she wanted to help me, and she couldn't because she didn't know what was wrong because I couldn't tell her. And eventually, in my 20s, I did tell her, and then I became the woman you see before you today. And mom was an ally and held my hand through that. But most of this memoir is about what that experience was like wishing for things that I couldn't tell anybody about, and what it was like dealing with my mom who wanted to help me and not having the vocabulary to tell her what was wrong, and neither of us having anything we could do about it. And it has a happy ending because I'm a pretty happy person now. But I had wanted to write this book for years. I always wanted to write a memoir about that part of my life. And I pitched it to Andrews McMeel, and they were excited about it. And I have been working on this book for like 3 years. And it was supposed to be done by now. It's not. It's almost done. It will probably come out next year sometime. I'm sorry, everybody, that I didn't get it done faster. Memoirs are hard. Memoirs are hard to write. And also, I had to deal with questions like, do I use people's real names? A lot of these are real things that happened. These are real people. So I kind of spent some time going around asking people, like, one, would you mind if I talked about you in a book that's about this? And two, how do you remember these events? Do you remember it? I talked to my mom, but also other people a lot about this. Like, I remember it this way. How do you remember this? And I'm pretty pleased with how this book has come together. We'll see if it resonates with people. I hope it doesn't dramatically change my life to release a book about this, because I kind of like my life now. But I also think that maybe some people will find something to relate to in this story. And a lot of it too, it's just sort of just about me being a kid in the 1980s. It's not just all about this one thing that was a huge drag on my happiness and isn't anymore now. But it's, it's sort of a snapshot of my life then too. And I hope people like it.
If a few comments I have on that is that if you're going to be an angry kid being in Seattle in the mid to early 90s, was probably
Oh
a
my,
great place to be.
oh my God, I was such a big Nirvana fan. Like I was all about that music. It was, yeah, being angry with the world as a teenager in Seattle in the early 90s. Like I didn't even stand out that much. Everybody was at least kind of in kind of in that space, in that place and time. And there was a thing um, that like grunge artists would do where they would like buy dresses, and like male grunge artists would like buy dresses and skirts at thrift stores and wear them on stage and to make a statement to, in solidarity with women and in favor of gender equality. And so I was able to like wear dresses and be like, I'm making a statement, but really I just wanted to wear a dress.
I remember. I think
And
Cobain was doing that, wasn't he?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
Cobain was loudly making a statement about women's. There was a show they played in I think Rio de Janeiro, where the opening act was L7, which is an all-female punk rock band, and the audience was sort of being some people in the audience were sort of being sexist jerks to them. So Cobain put on a cocktail dress and a tiara and played his set that way, and you know, I loved that stuff. You know, I it gave me cover to express some of what I was feeling inside in a socially acceptable way. This, by the way, is all covered in my memoir.
No, we've given them a little preview.
Yeah,
Yes.
a little preview of what's to come. And then his death was really hard for me.
Oh yeah.
Someone finally said what I wanted to say myself, and then he died, and I was broken up about it.
Yeah, it was hard. It's still hard for people now. Like people still go to his grave, I think, right, or his
Yeah,
house.
26 years later, people, yeah, he's been gone almost as long as he was here. And that's a
Oh
melancholy set.
wow. Would it be safe to say, and this is my real last question, would it be safe to say that Phoebe and Her Unicorn is you making a comic that you would have loved to read as a kid?
That is a very good description of Phoebe and Her Unicorn. I am writing something I would have wanted to read as a kid. And it's gratifying to me that so many of today's kids seem to like it. Something my editor said once that I really liked was she told me, "You've given kids a weird friend in the comics to hang out with." And I like that. That's who Phoebe is. She's your weird friend in the comics.
She would be fun to hang out with in real life.
Well, since she's basically a self-portrait, thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.